Welcome to the webinar today. We're going to be talking about how to build positive relationships. Let me tell you about who's on the webinar today. We have the distinguished and amazing Jack Zenger with us today. Jack, welcome, and we're so happy you're here.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we also have with us Bruce Wilson. Bruce is a regional vice president. He's going to have a special offer at the end of the webinar. Say hello, Bruce.
Hey, hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to joining you at the end of the webinar today with a special offer, as Joe just mentioned, that will directly relate to building relationships, our subject matter today. So looking forward to speaking with you then. Joe?
Thank you. And finally, we have Jennifer Lambert. She is our chat host. Any instructions for folks as they chat, Jen?
Oh, thanks so much, Joe. Yes, I'll be monitoring the chat. Realize that Jack and Joe are doing this live, and so any questions specifically for them we can follow up with afterwards. And please make sure that we have your correct and best contact information, whether it be a phone number or email, and I will be right on top of those as much as I can.
Thanks, Jen. We appreciate having you with us because it's like having two brains, you know, we can't do both things at once. Well, Jack, start us off here with a history of the world here.
Well, it's always helpful to have a little bit of context. And so as we talk today about the importance of building relationships, we thought it might be just useful to kind of go back in time. Shortly before I was born, it was a very important kind of theory and philosophy that was known as scientific management. People were viewed as kind of objects that needed to be controlled and needed to be managed very tightly. And so we used stopwatches and we observed how they behaved. And as you look at this history of what's happened in terms of different management theories and philosophies over time, what we see is a gradual and inexorable movement toward people becoming more important. A management philosophy moved from being highly authoritarian and controlling to being much more democratic and participative. There was an increasing emphasis on people and their importance and their emotions. The discovery that emotions made a big difference in how people performed went back to the days of the Hawthorne studies. But the importance of what the organization could do to increase the level of performance and productivity and of people has just been a very relentless process over the past 70, 80 years. So with that background, let me just kind of mention that our analysis showed that there are three kind of primary orientations that people have at work. Those three you see depicted on the screen. There are people who lean heavily toward being analytical. They want to have understanding. They want to have knowledge. They want to be technically up to date. There's also a philosophy that is very much around, you know, my job is to simply get results and get her done, you know, and a very strong emphasis on productivity. And then finally, there's a third primary orientation, which is about relationships and how people kind of connect with one another. Now, we're not suggesting that people fall completely into any one of those categories. To the contrary, most of us are kind of a mix of those three things. But we will be talking today about those three primary orientations. So Joe, kind of go through the data that we have about them.
I will, Jack. And I remember in high school, there were the smart kids. There were the athletes, the results, got to do it, you know, the driven people. And then there are the socialites, right? I mean, this goes back to high school. And you think about work, you know, you got the brainiacs, you got the drivers, and then you got the relationship people. What I did is I looked at our data and we took those three capabilities, analytical, driven, or relationships, and said, where's your highest score? Okay. And what's interesting about this is about 30% of the people, their highest score was on analytical. And if you measure their overall, if you have a highest score on analytical, your overall leadership effectiveness score was at the 37th percentile. So a little bit below average, right? If you were driven, if your highest score was driven, your overall leadership effectiveness score was at the 41st percentile. But if your highest score was on relationships, and again, that's the highest percentage of people, about 45, you were at the 45th percentile in terms of your ability to your overall leadership effectiveness. So as we look at these three scores, as you think about them, if none of the three were above average, right, below average on all three, your overall leadership effectiveness score is at the 19th percentile, 19.6. Now, if drive and analytical are above average and relationships are below average, that moves you to the 57th percentile. If relationships and analytical are above average, but drive is below, that leaves you, a little bit better, 58th percentile. But if you combine relationships with drive, those are a little more powerful, and analytical is below average, you go to the 65th percentile. So as you look at that, doing two of them above average, that doesn't get it. But if all three are above average, kaboom, 81st percentile. So there is something about the three of them together that really make a difference. And Jack, I'm sure you've seen that in your experience where you've seen leaders that are missing one, they're low on one. And then that combination of the three together really gives you some power there, doesn't it?
Very, very much.
So if you look at this by age, you get some interesting kind of dynamics here. Now, this is only those who scored above average on their 360, okay? So these are the better leaders. And as you see there, analytical skills, they grow over time. That makes sense, doesn't it? Because people learn, they get experience. When they're younger, they don't have as much experience. And so that tends to improve over time. And then if you look at for results, that's a way that young leaders really differentiate themselves. They deliver what they say they're going to deliver. And you can see that goes down a bit. But notice that those, when I say down, it's only a few percentile points down, but it does trend down as people get older. What does relationships do? Well, relationships starts off very high. And I think to really distinguish yourself and as you're young, having good relationships is really important. And then it kind of goes down a little bit, but it comes up towards the end of your career. I think that's the boost that a lot of people need to sort of connect a little more at the end of their career, and that helps them. So Jack, talk about these the three-legged stool.
Well, as you remember from the slide that Joe showed you just a moment ago, when people were above average on all three of these primary orientations, they were at the 82nd percentile. So that's just a simple way of thinking about the importance of these three. And when they're combined, you have a very stable, very comfortable stool on which to sit. Obviously, when you remove or lose one of the legs on a stool, it becomes much less stable. So we want to talk with you about the whole idea of the importance of having strong legs on your stool. And Joe, you might want to just kind of present the data on this sample feedback report that people are going to get, so they'll understand better what their own stool looks like.
That's true. Now, this gives you preference, not performance, but the preferences are correlated with performance. So if you have a negative score on these, we would suggest that your performance is probably lower on that particular part. And so think of this as your stool. if it was perfectly kind of level, it would 0, 0, 0. But what you're seeing is some legs are longer than the others and some are shorter than the others. So your stool is leaning. And in this case, the stool is a little short on the analytical end. It's high on the relationships end and kind of a little bit, 3 on the results end. So the scores range from -5 to +5. It's your preference around these 3 things, and it'll show you kind of what you like to do, what you prefer to do. And you can still be competent at that, but your preference does correlate with your performance on these 3 things. So we thought that would be interesting to you. And we're going to focus today on relationships. And where's that relationship leg for you? It's interesting because on average, for the group that's on this webinar, that was your highest score, was relationships. It's also kind of interesting that Drive for Results was on average a lower score. So that's interesting because, again, the importance of all 3 of these working together kind of works to help you.
So we want to emphasize the importance of relationships and help you understand better what effect it has on all other competencies. And let's just take one as an example. Let's look at the relationship between relationships and being good at that and the topic of communication. So for example, if a person is above average in terms of their relationships, but their communication is not at the 75th percentile. So these are when we say high, it's talking about being at the 75th percentile or above. And when this isn't a strength, that's when it's below the 75th percentile. So what you see here is that if a person is high in relationships, not high in communication skills, there's about a 2% chance that they're going to be one of your top 10% leaders. If you're to flip those 2, and if you were to see a person who is where their relationships are not a strength, they're not at the 75th percentile, but their communication skills are at the 75th percentile or above, we see that in this case, there's a higher percentage of that person being one of your top 10% leaders. But then when you then put those 2 together, building relationships with good communication skills, obviously this is a far too smart group to know that, or to believe that would simply be an addition. There's a big, major jolt that happens, a big bump when you put those 2 together as people jump to the 88th percentile when they're at the 75th percentile on building relationships and simultaneously on communication. And Joe, please, and then now show them how this building relationships impacts all the other competencies.
It really does. And this was one of the really critical factors we found in our original research, Jack. We call this powerful combinations, where you put 2 things together, you get more, and this influence. And so how does relationships influence any other competency? And what we're showing you is the combined effect of combining good positive relationships above the 75th percentile with any other competency. And you can see there that for every competency, there's a profound effect. That adding relationships to any competency is really, really critical, and it influences the effectiveness of every competency. I mean, you think about it with communications. I mean, when somebody gives a communication and you don't like them, you sit back and you think of, let me tell you why that's wrong. I mean, you come up with reasons why, well, that's crap. I don't believe that, right? But when you like them, you sort of find reasons to agree. And then that's why when, you get that powerful combination, it's a tremendous positive effect. And It helps stretch goals, collaboration and teamwork, inspires, all these competencies. It has a profound effect. And so if we look at just the effect of building relationships on discretionary effort, and I love to say that every employee every day makes a decision. Am I going to do the minimum amount of work possible, or am I going to give you a little bit more effort? And people with poor relationship skills, first through ninth percentile, only have about 16% of their direct reports who are willing to give extra effort. But the better you are at relationships, you end up with 65% of your direct reports willing to give more effort. And in that team, that's a very different team, right? That's a very different feeling in a team. And here's the percentage of employees that think about quitting. Poor relationships. Well, if you hate your boss, that does not, lend itself to kind of you staying there. So 48% of the people are thinking about quitting. If you have a great relationship with your boss, only 14% are thinking about quitting. How about the effect of building relationships and the difference between males and females? Well, this is kind of interesting because females tend to be significantly better at building and maintaining relationships than males. And we found that with other competencies, but isn't that interesting that females tend to be better at this, and that difference is statistically significant. And just for fun, I showed you the t-value there, and then we tested it with just 50%. We did a randomized experiment with just 50% of the population, and again, found the same results. If you look at management levels in terms of relationship building, what you see here is that the people that have the best relationships are the individual contributors. They're better. And yet as people go up at levels, their relationship building go down. Jack, do you have an explanation for that?
Boy, it's very surprising, isn't it, that the senior executives do not get as high a scores in terms of how they are perceived in terms of their relationships as do the supervisors. Maybe there's a closer day-to-day, hour-by-hour connection between supervisors and their colleagues than there is for people who are at senior levels, who maybe see people less frequently, more distantly. But it's a bit troubling to see that data.
Yeah, and oftentimes top leaders are asked to make really difficult decisions that aren't very popular with some employees. So
Right.
maybe that has something to do with it also, I guess. If you look at this by management level, what's interesting here is that males versus females at management level, you notice that the males, it tends to go down further, right? And the females, it still goes down a bit, but not as much as the males. And then finally, as we look at age, and you ever heard that expression, Jack, grumpy old men?
Yes, I have heard that. Probably had it used about me at times, but yeah, right.
Well, evidently we validated that.
Right.
You notice that it does go down slightly for women also, from the 25 to 35 area, but less. And so maybe that's just some encouragement for men to not be grumpy old men and to not have that appearance as they come forward. We wondered if there was a difference in the pandemic. Our theory was given how hard the pandemic was, the challenges of the pandemic. Well, would relationships go up or down? Well, as you see here, during the pandemic, relationship, if we look pre-pandemic, relationships, the 50th percentile. In the pandemic, relationships went up to the 55th percentile, and engagement went from the 50th percentile to the 53rd percentile. these things improved. Jack, do you have a theory about why?
Well, let's use the next slide to kind of talk about this very timely topic.
Well, before we do that,
oh,
let me show you one more graph here.
Okay, yeah.
And that is if you look at, not everybody in the pandemic had positive relationships. More did, but some didn't. And what you see here is if we look at the bottom 25%, they were actually the 21st percentile. Top 25% were the 79th percentile. And we also see a difference in trust. And so during the pandemic, some people sort of, kind of really got stronger and worked harder and tried harder, which made it go up. And some got crushed under the pressure and it went down. And so there was, it was like this very difficult period where the good got better, those weren't good got worse. So Jack, let's go on to this next one.
All right. Yeah, thanks. So we thought that it was really important to pause and talk about an obviously timely topic. We're all living right in the middle of this issue regarding working remotely and trying to understand what its advantages and disadvantages are. We've looked at data from lots of different sources, from McKinsey and HBR and Strategy Plus and all kinds of research organizations, and it goes on and on. But it is clear that there's a very high percentage of people who would turn down a new job that did not offer them flexible work. That there's a big chunk who will be full-time and they want to work from home in 2022. There's about 80% that indicate that their productivity is higher working from home. That's really been fascinating to see people both self-report and where there is also objective data that productivity has indeed improved. We've measured improved engagement in many organizations during this pandemic period. So there clearly are a number of advantages. There also are some potential problems, some disadvantages. We've seen this mass resignation. A lot of people in the month of August resigned from their positions. And I guess if you were to stand back and say, what's the big picture? You would say, employees are kind of still deciding. There's clearly some that want to work from home all the time. There's a smaller group that want to work from home or want to stay at work and work from the office all the time. There's a much bigger group in the middle that want to have a flexible schedule. On the employer side, there's a great percentage of employers who would love to see things return back to where, more normality as they saw it, 2019 and before. And so there is this big disconnect between what employers sort of generally would like to see and what employees are kind of struggling with and wrestling with in terms of trying to decide what do they want exactly. So
yeah, I love that quote from the Microsoft CEO who said that 70% want more flexibility, but they also want more human connection. And it's like, yeah, we want more connection, but we want more flexibility. And it's like, it's like, are you mixed up?
There,
we're feeling both of these emotions at the same time.
They're a little bit conflicted. Well, so we have thought about, might we offer any recommendations to others who are struggling with this question? And I think certainly one of them is if you are a person working from your home, really be productive and demonstrate your productivity on a regular basis. It's important that you know it and that your boss knows it and that your colleagues know it. Show up to group events when there's a all company phone call, participate. Turn your camera on. I know that there's some evidence that says that having your camera on all the time is more tiring than not, but having your camera on indicates you're engaged. I think there's no question that some of the data, the best data that we've seen is if you're a manager, reach out more often, connect with people. If you're a work from home colleague, you take the initiative, call your boss, stay in touch. Make room for casually checking in and when you don't need anything or you don't want to have something done for you. But just make it a point to stay in touch with the people that you work with, and be emotionally present during discussions rather than kind of sitting off to the side and doing your email or doing other things. You know, people can tell when you're engaged and not engaged, and so creating these moments of engagement with colleagues. And these can be mentoring discussions or sharing ideas or engaging with other people in a problem-solving meeting, or just simply taking the time to listen. Those are very key behaviors. So let's just kind of wrap up and before we move on and just talk about some summary conclusions. What we've kind of covered is that building positive relationships is an important ingredient in a leader's effectiveness. Every other competency improves when leaders improve their relationship building, especially when it goes above the 75th percentile. Third, relationship building improves your subordinates, your direct reports' engagement, their discretionary effort, and their intentions to stay with the organization. We learned that females, to no one's surprise, are more effective at building relationships than are males, and that top managers tend to be not quite as effective than the individual contributors in the organizations. So males become less effective, unfortunately, at relationship building as they age. Present company accepted, obviously. Yeah, right. All right, Joe.
So what do? How do you improve what actions have the highest probability of making a significant impact? Well, you could just be nice, or you could do more small talk, or you could buy lunch for colleagues. Jack, are you up for lunch today?
You bet I am.
Join the softball team. That's always... And if you think about these things, I mean, they're sort of helpful, but they're not very helpful. I mean, what really makes a difference? Again, we went to the data, 1 million raters, 110,000 leaders. What we did is we looked at people who were really good at building relationships, and we said, how did they do it? What other behaviors did they mix together to get these powerful combinations? We talked about that in a minute, and we're going to talk about communications as one of those. But let's show you the results. What we found is the 6 companion, what we call strength builders. And these strength builders are what's great news about this is you don't have to be great at every one of these, but they really give you some really meaningful activities you can do, some things that you can do to improve your ability to build relationships. And we're going to talk about each one of these, starting with teamwork and collaboration. And as you think about teamwork and collaboration, have you ever been part of a great team? A team where you felt accepted, you felt part of that team? I have a story that kind of relates to this. When kids were younger, one of my kids wanted a dog. He ended up buying a Siberian Husky. His name was Kessler, and Kessler was an interesting dog. What I thought I was getting when we got a dog was I imagined myself walking the dog, going to the park, throwing the Frisbee, sitting around watching TV with the dog curled up at my feet. None of that happened with Rick Kessler. I mean, if you took him for a walk, whatever speed you went, he went faster. If you go to the park and throw the Frisbee, well, he goes out and chases it. He picks up the frisbee, shakes it at you, and then runs away. You can never take a husky off their leash. And if you put him in the TV room at night, he would chew on the furniture. I didn't know what to do with this dog. I couldn't control him, couldn't manage him. He certainly wasn't a good member of our team. Well, that was until we found that Kessler got to be part of a dog sled team. And it's interesting that the transition Kessler made from being an individual contributor and doing his own thing to being part of a team. As part of that dog sled team, Kessler pulled hard. He did amazing things. He loved to be there. Have you ever been part of a great team? A team where you wanted to be there, where your work was better because you were there, because you felt accepted and you would do more just to keep up with the team. You ever been part of that kind of team? You ever been part of the team from hell? I mean, the difference is huge. If you can build a great team, that kind of team where everybody feels accepted, where everybody feels valued, where everybody knows they're wanted, wow, that makes a difference. That makes a real difference. What's number two?
18 years ago, when we first began doing research and publishing some of our data in the form of what are the capabilities that leaders ideally need to possess, the topic of diversity and equity and inclusion was not on that list. And what's been fascinating is that in the last few years, this notion of having diversity, equity, and inclusion has really escalated. Fortunately, the younger generation is very dedicated to it. And so the second strength builder is valuing diversity. That if you want to build relationships, have other people recognize that within you, you have this desire to make others around you feel included and to feel respected, to be treated equally, and that you welcome people who have different skin colors, different racial backgrounds, different religious philosophies. That is really key.
It's a critical issue. The third one is engenders trust. Now, here's an interesting fact. Across the world, if you ask a randomly selected group of people this one question, generally speaking, would you say most people can be trusted or you need to be careful? Okay, that one question, you can predict the GDP of a country. Because in Sweden, about 60% of the people there will respond and they say, generally people can be trusted. In some South American countries, 6% would say people generally can be trusted. And that correlates very strongly with the GDP. In your team, if people can answer that question, can team members be trusted, or do you have to kind of be careful? It affects all kinds of outcomes and your ability to be successful and all kinds of things. Trust is a critical issue. The number one factor that affects trust more than anything else is your ability to build strong relationships. It is the number one factor affecting whether there's good trust in your group. So trust is an issue, and it's clearly, as you can build the trust, it really helps relationships.
In terms of building relationships, I think one of the qualities that we really very much appreciate is someone who really pays attention to developing others. I think back to my own first job out of graduate school. It was for a company that manufactured equipment for supermarkets, trays and platters and carts and things that were used mostly in the meat department. The boss I worked for deliberately took me on business trips where I wasn't making any kind of a contribution, but it was purely for my education. And we would talk after we had gone to visit one of our distributors or one of our clients, and we'd talk about why he did things and why he said what he had. And his obvious desire to inculcate in me a better understanding of the business and to help me be a more effective contributor. I've never forgotten. Blackie Williams was his name. And I bet everybody on the call today can think of somebody in their career who took the time to reach out to develop them. A very important way of building relationships.
That's a great story, Jack. The next one is learning agility. And here's the simple, easy thing you can do to increase your effectiveness and to build relationships. It's to ask others for feedback. Because one of the things that happens when you ask others for feedback is you tend to get it. And occasionally you'll hear something you really need to listen to, but because you ask, you're more open to listening. Now, let me suggest that the way you ask for feedback and get really good feedback is asking what you could do better. Because if you'd say, how'd I do in that meeting? Oh, you did great. But ask, what could I have done in that meeting to run the meeting better or to be more efficient? Asking for feedback can have a tremendous positive effect, and it affects your learning agility. And the point here is your ability to build relationships is based on your ability to change over time, to modify some bad habits, to stop some things that are driving people crazy. And the only way you can figure those out is by asking them, what could I do to do better? And if you're honest with them and you ask for honest feedback, they'll tell you.
The late Peter Drucker, the man who I think is largely attributed as being the founder of modern management thinking and theory, has made the comment quite frequently that most failures in management and leadership can be directly linked to poor communication. So the sixth and last one that we'll talk about communicates powerfully. Being good at that, taking the time, being more transparent, that is a key element in building strong relationships inside the organization.
Well, and that's a big one, isn't it, Jack? Because we assume people know and they don't. So on your self-assessment, what we did is we had you rate your effectiveness on these 6 different behaviors. Now, you can see your scores on these 6 different behaviors. We show you your average score. The average scores based on 110,000 leaders that we've assessed on this. This gives you a good idea about which one of these you're doing well and which one you're not doing well. And it'll be helpful for you to kind of look at these things. We also ask you to rate your effectiveness on how good you are at building relationships, how effective you are. Are you above average on that? Are you below average? And so where is that and where's your preference on that? The combination of those things kind of help you think about, well, which one could I do to improve? And again, you don't have to be great at every one of these, although none of these can be a fatal flaw. But as you think about this, just be thinking about what you could do differently. Now, let me show you the effect of these being well or being ineffective. You're being ineffective on these. Let's say you have a fatal flaw. Now, people with a fatal flaw, they're doing terribly on these, and fatal flaws would be scores of less than 3, less than 3, where you'd said, gee, I need some improvement. I need some improvement. If you have one fatal flaw, your typical average effectiveness at relationship building, that's at the 25th percentile. So our advice, if you have a fatal flaw, fix it. Fix it, pay some attention to it, And you don't have to be brilliant at it. You just have to be better than you currently are at it. So let's say that you do one of these 6 behaviors and you're above average at it. Well, that moves up your effectiveness at building relationships to the 35th percentile, 2 to the 46th, 3 to the 56th, 4 to the 65th. And that's the logic of, well, I've got to be good at everything. So you're trying to improve. So you constantly move to be above average. Let me give you another possibility. If you were really, really good at one of these, you had a profound strength at one of these, 90th percentile, your ability to build relationships would move to the 73rd percentile. If you were above it, if you were at the 90th percentile at 2, 83rd, 3 at 89th percentile. That's the strength building effect. That's what we believe in. So again, think about if I have a fatal flaw. If you don't, what we'd strongly recommend is trying to develop a profound strength around 1, 2, or 3 of these strength builders.
Okay, so if you think about then some logical course of action going forward, as Joe has already stated, if you see that one of them is really low, then we would very strongly encourage you to think about, do I want to fix that? Do I have enough passion about that to really to tackle it? And we hope that you do, because having a fatal flaw in any one of those 6 strength builders really does tend to detract from your performance. If, however, you don't have one that is really low, we would strongly urge you to think about, okay, and which of the ones that I've thought about and that are listed there, which one of those would probably, for me and my current position, make the biggest difference? And so we're curious people, we're kind of data junkies, and so we're going to conduct a little poll with you and ask you, which of these strength builders do you think you might be inclined to work on? For whichever reason, either that it's a kind of a fatal flaw right now, or that it's something you're moderately good at, but that you just want to get better at. So please weigh in if you would, and we would just be curious about what is at the top of your list.
I'm curious, Jack. Let me try to pitch one. You know what the easiest one to fix here is? It's communicates powerfully. You know, I think that's the easiest one to get better at. I think communication skills are easy. Vote for communicates powerfully.
All right, let's see what the data really says. So, okay,
Oh my gosh.
so maybe you influenced people.
I did. I shouldn't have, but I did.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing your views. And it looks like, again, communicates powerfully was the one that did come up. So when you complete the feedback to us, you will have access to a development resource. So for whichever one of those 6 strength builders you selected, there you can download some very concrete recommendations about what you can do to become even more effective at that. So we want to close with this kind of statement that kind of summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about, and that is, good colleagues are those who know that we is much more powerful than me. What might be an alternative way of leveraging at this strength builders that help build these relationships. And so now I want to turn the time and the microphone over to Bruce Wilson, who has a very important message for you. So Bruce, take it away.
Great, thank you, Jack. You know, over the weekend, I previewed the webinar today, and I was thinking, might there be an alternative way of leveraging all the strength builders that we talked about today to help build relationships? In other words, is there a highly leverageable skill set that might impact all 6 relationship strength builders? And in fact, there is. It's coaching. Think about it. Coaching helps you develop others by providing coaching support. Certainly, coaching sessions enhance collaboration between you, your direct reports, and other important team members. Whenever we're assisting others through coaching, we're also building trust and increasing communication. And even learning agility is enhanced, because a big part of learning agility, as Joe mentioned in the webinar today, is modeling coachability by asking for feedback and acting on it. This is also a big part, by the way, of creating a coaching culture. And finally, if we're practicing our coaching with all members of our diverse team, we're promoting the idea of valuing diversity. So that leads us to our special offer today, which is to enable you to participate in our January live online Extraordinary Coach public session for only $450. That's nearly 1/3 off our standard fee of $650. And for those of you in qualified organizations, not only can you attend, but you can have 2 additional of your colleagues attend with you at the same special offer. So think about it. This is a way to focus really on one particular skill set that will lift 6 different behaviors around relationships. In fact, it will actually lift many other leadership behaviors and competencies also. So having said that, we'd love to get your feedback today on our webinar. An exit survey will launch as we conclude the webinar today. If you don't have time to give us your feedback now, you can copy the bit.ly link you see there in our chat room, and you can give us your feedback a little bit later today when it's more convenient. Now, upon completion, you'll be able to download the Building Relationships Development Guide that Jack just mentioned. Also, in the survey, you can let us know if you'd like to take advantage of the special offer to attend our Extraordinary Coach public session in February. So having said that, thanks for participating today. Have a great day. Have a great week. And we look forward to connecting in the near future.